Welcome, everybody, to the Caller Experience is Patient Experience webinar with Parlance and Christine Wells from Blue Tree Network. Welcome, Chris, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great. Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about, with Chris, about some case uses of Parlance, but also in the bigger context of Chris developing contact centers in the healthcare setting, specifically around really integrating electronic health record and smoothing out caller experiences and focusing entirely on the patient in terms of strategizing the growth of her contact centers. Get started here to just put things in context. We want to talk about the importance of the caller experience in healthcare. Chris, you want to give your insight on this? Mm-hmm.
Sure. So as everyone can see there from these different verticals, healthcare kind of leads everyone in how many people are still using phones to contact us. And there's a variety of reasons for that, but some of them might be like they have privacy concerns regarding, the services that they want, the critical nature of some of their healthcare needs. And, some of this is frankly because healthcare is kind of slow to grasp new technology, and we haven't really moved into the omni-channel as much as other industries have.
Great. Well, and also when we think about the patient journey overall, we really need to consider the fact that there are so many touch points along it that involve the voice channel. And as we look at what is the overall patient experience like in any health system, we like to be thinking about creating a lot of good continuity, consistency between touch points so that patients are always feeling consistently cared for and that you're consistently supporting that brand that they're calling into. And now more than ever, as health systems have become so large and complicated, it's important to reinforce with your patients that they are inside your health system at all these different touch points along the way. What I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about your experience, Chris, with developing the contact center at Renown Health and sort of what that looked like for you and some of the challenges you came across. So I'm going to turn this over to you now.
Okay, so Renown Health is in Reno, Nevada. It's the largest and fastest growing healthcare system in northern Nevada. We serve a huge rural area. And so I was there 18 years. I started off as a tech in diagnostic imaging, actually, and then when I became director, we wanted to create something that would make it easier for patients and physicians' offices to use our services, and also something to ensure that we would get reimbursed for our services that we did offer to people. So we started off with 2 little people with a contact center for DI. It caught on really fast. It was very successful. The hospital loved it, and we very quickly moved to the primary care services and also all the specialty services, lab, everything, respiratory therapy, everything with outpatient appointments we incorporated into our contact center.
So over the course of that 18 years, how large was that contact center when you left? You started with 2, you mentioned that.
Yeah, I started with 2. So in the contact center, we actually only started probably about 7 years ago. And when I left, it was just under 200 people. So it grew really fast. We had a lot of growing pains as some of these numbers here can show people. We had some serious growing pains. We were growing exponentially, and you can see that we were having serious problems. We weren't meeting our patients' needs at all.
Okay, yeah. And let's talk a little bit about, let's not dwell on the past too much, but let's talk about the strategy you made to improve that. Yeah.
So we decided to go the multi-pronged strategy that would capitalize on people, processes, and technology to create a contact center that was both efficient and scalable. So we looked at increasing the agent availability to deflect calls that didn't belong with a person and to automate routine requests. So in regards to inbound call volume, we spent a lot of time actually, first of all, trying to optimize the phone trees that we already had, those old-fashioned phone trees. And after a while, we just kind of gave up on that. We decided that this old technology just didn't offer us what we needed to help patients, navigate through our complex health system. And it's not what patients expected either. So luckily, I met Parlance at a conference, and I was actually really surprised and very pleased to find out that there was technology out there that provided the solutions for all of our objectives. And we found that the capabilities and experience Parlance brought to the table, as well as the way they approach the caller experience, would really deliver the impact we wanted to have for our patients.
Right. So when we first met you, I believe it was at the HCCT conference. It was probably maybe 2015 or something. Or that I remember talking with my colleague after you two visited, and one of the big issues was just we're getting so many calls for so many things that trying to set up a quote-unquote phone tree just isn't going to cover it. And us being able to tell you, well, how about an option where people can just ask for what they need? And in order to do this well, you need to be listening, paying attention, monitoring, and servicing it all the time, which, of course, we wound up doing quite a bit at Renown. There were a lot of iterations to reach those optimal service levels. So now you've been introduced to a potential solution, but you've got to bring that solution back to Renown. And how did that go?
Well, this is probably the biggest challenge of not only Renown, everywhere I've worked with this kind of a project. It was a big, huge cultural change. Leadership, from all leadership, mid-level all the way up to senior executives, they firmly believe that our callers wanted us to have a real person answer all these calls, right? And the reality was that we just couldn't hire enough trained agents to do this. And patients didn't want a real person a lot of the times, right? I mean, they were used to automation in other industries. They expected that out of their healthcare system. So what we did, and I know you'll remember this, Sheila, we have a patient advisory council at Renown, and it consists of patients and doctors, practicing doctors, retired doctors. There was marketing people there. There was other healthcare staff there. And what we did was we set up a demo to prove to them what this technology could offer our community. And the worry, of course, yeah, you do. The worry was that this wasn't right for our patients. And I think we proved through our demonstration that this is exactly what we needed for our patients.
Well, and I should mention one of the things that we really encourage people to do was to, of course, interact and make coherent requests to the Parlance service. But also it's important to see how the service responds when a caller demonstrates that they are not a good candidate for self-serving. And that's an important aspect of that patient experience, is get out of the way of the caller who's not the right candidate, right?
Yes, and we proved that at the demo, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. We had a few who were, whether they meant to or not, who were not good candidates.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that was great that they were actually able to prove a point. One of the most important points was that they could get to a person really easily.
Right. So finding that balance, that's a big part of what we do at Parlance at the outset, is each culture that we come into, each health system that we work with, the balance is just a little bit different between that live agent and that automated solution partnership. But the important aspect of it is that we're working very, very close with agents and making sure that callers are arriving to the right person very quickly, whether that's an agent or somebody to navigate the call, or directly to the skill set they need, or out into the larger health system. Maybe they need to pay a bill, or they're looking for somebody else who's not associated with that contact center. So you made the pitch, you got the leadership team to take a risk, and then let's talk about how it worked out for you.
Yeah, so actually you can see some of our results here, and these results that we obtained within the first couple of weeks. It was really a really positive experience. These numbers show one thing, but one of the things I wanted to mention here was, and that's not listed, is it's not really quantifiable, is the effect that this had for our agents. Our
Right.
agents, some of our agents had been around for 45 years in our healthcare system, and they were very fearful for their roles. They knew they had an important role with the health system, and they were very important, or they were nervous not only that their job would go away, but that they wouldn't have that effect that they were used to having. So, but after we went live, they were delighted. They were like, "Oh my God, I can breathe between these calls. I can spend time with callers, and actually, the ones that opt out of the automation, I can actually spend some time with them now. I have time to really get them where they're going. Their stress level went way down." And one of the things I'd like to tell a little story here because I had to, about 3 weeks after we went live with this, I had to go and present the results to the executive steering committee, and I was kind of nervous. This was a huge cultural change. And I stood up to do my presentation, and I didn't even have to say a thing. The whole team just broke out in applause. It was a very gratifying moment for me personally.
Oh, I love to hear that. I love to hear that. That is a good story. Well, one of the things that I remember from that first week of Go Live was how much insight we were able to get about this deflection of calls that don't belong. We were all surprised at that number. And and that has a lot to do with the way Renown was marketing the phone numbers, right? You had the big kind of catch-all, and we know that patients have a tendency to call the first number they see, whether it be a Google search or maybe it's something printed on a bill. So that ability to avoid having to hand the call back off or transfer it out and just ask the patient, "How may I direct your call?" Really, that I remember being very surprising to everybody. Everybody knew it was an issue, but they didn't understand to what extent. And that's, creeping up on a third of your calls. So it's very important.
No, exactly. Yeah. And we had no idea on how to address that until we got this technology.
Right. Okay, let's move on to a second case where you moved away from Renown and began working with Blue Tree Network. And then in one of your early engagements, just so happens that your first customer was also a Parlance customer. Want to talk a little bit about Tahoe Forest? Yeah.
Yeah, so Tahoe Forest Hospital is located in Truckee, California. It's just north of Lake Tahoe. I get all these beautiful, beautiful assignments. And this, again, was an area, it was a rural hospital, not-for-profit, but they were growing really quickly, and they were a critical access hospital. So it was really important that we were able to provide our patients with a really good experience up there and get them where they needed to go.
Right. And at that point, when you were first introduced to them, Parlance was answering phone calls to the main hospital. So basically working alongside the PBX switchboard operators. But your mission going in was beyond that. You want to talk a little bit about why you were brought in specifically?
Yeah, this Tahoe Forest had a different set of challenges. They wanted to move to the Schegistration model. We'll talk about that in a second. I know a lot of people out there already know what Schegistration is, but they wanted to move to that model. They wanted to optimize the access, and they also wanted to deliver a really strong but singular brand experience to everybody. They were bringing together a lot of loosely knit clinics, and they needed to get that brand out there.
This is another common story that we see nationwide, that sort of bringing new practices into the health system family and really creating that brand awareness in the community. And although it's kind of in rural Truckee, California, they're in a pretty competitive market there, right?
They are very competitive. They compete with Sacramento, UC Davis, with everything that's in Reno. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great. So let's talk a bit about your coming in and supporting Schegistration.
So this is this weird word, Schegistration. A lot of people that are in the healthcare industry will recognize this. It's like a combination of scheduling and registration. That's where that word comes from. But a lot of healthcare organizations nationwide are actually using this so that they can optimize their access. They can really ensure financial clearance before the patient receives services. And what it involves is scheduling is actually a very small part of it. So the Schegistration, or the patient access department, we manage all the referrals, we check eligibility and benefits, we obtain pre-authorization, we get a full pre-registration, And then we advise patients on their benefits, on their co-pays, co-insurances. If the patient feels comfortable doing this over the phone, we'll actually do the collections then. And then we finally schedule the appointment after everything is done and the patient knows. And the patient, actually, this is great for patient experience. We found that patients really don't like that kind of mysterious gut feeling that they don't quite know what they may owe or if this is covered or that's covered or anything when they go for a service. So they really like this clarity before they come in for their services.
Mm-hmm.
The other piece of that, though, the other piece of that I just wanted to mention is that in order to make Schegistration work, we need to have a really tight integration with the EMR, which in this case was Epic, the telephone systems, the IVR systems. Everything really needs to be very tightly integrated and support each other so that the patient will get a good experience.
Right. And at this point at Tahoe Forest, patients are calling individual clinics, am I correct? And then the calls are being moved to the Schegistration group when appropriate?
Right. Yeah. They have one. This is where we started to kind of bring that brand in.
Right. So here we look at that kind of optimizing access. Of course, you're optimizing access by putting that Schegistration function all together. It's a very holistic experience for the patient as they're setting up their care. But then there's just that, getting to that Schegistration customer service representative, and that's where Parlance kind of came in and helped you a little bit. Can you talk about that journey for you, kind of reaching out, engaging Parlance, and then going back to Tahoe Forest and talking about expanding the reach of our service there?
Yeah, so what we wanted to do is we wanted to give the patients some self-service options, and that's things like using the patient portal for being able to schedule directly themselves in the middle of the night if they wanted. But it was also things like just navigating through the system, because even though it's a little rural hospital, it got complicated. It's a complex system to navigate. So we, with my experience with Parlance, I was able to go in and talk to them, and they already had a great impression of Parlance just from the way they were using it already, and just to be able to expand that and use it as the front door on all the clinics and on the hospital system as a whole to unify that brand experience, and more importantly, to get people where they're going. What we do is we try to offload things that patients don't need to be calling the clinics about, and 50% of all the calls going into the clinics we found were people wanting to schedule. So we get those off of that line immediately and over to the access center immediately, and that reduces all those things at the front desk.
Well, and you just touched on something really important there that Parlance can help deliver insight to, and that is that you now understood that 50% of those calls coming into the clinics were about scheduling. So sort of on the back end, really understanding who's calling and what do they need. That's a great thing when you pick up the phone and allow people to just tell you what they need. Then we can start understanding better where calls are going and how we should be staffing for that. Right.
Exactly. I mean, after you guys did your analysis, we were able to not only find out about the scheduling calls, but 30% of the remaining calls were for prescription refills. We were able to send those to a more, they didn't have to go to the front desk. They had to go to a MA, and they didn't have to go to a live MA. They could go to a voice mailbox, depending on the clinic, how they wanted to handle it. So there was a lot of really good insight we received.
That's great. Good. And then again, sort of dovetailing off of this optimizing access, and you mentioned this earlier, was sort of reinforcing that brand experience and kind of creating a voice of the brand.
Exactly. The patients, once they become familiar with it, no matter what office they call, or if they call the main number, they know what to expect. It's the same voice. It's the same group of options. It's very easy.
You know where you've landed. And I should put a little plug in here for Parlance. We do use professional voice talent, and that really makes a difference. So when you're talking about creating that voice of your brand. That's great. Okay, so it wasn't as big a cultural sell because we had already planted the seeds for you, but still your results were pretty spectacular. Let's take a look at that.
Yeah, we saw excellent results. 69% of the calls were offloaded to the access center, And then 84% of the calls that were still going through the clinic were offloaded to the right person within the clinic, so they weren't going to the front desk at all. So it decreased those inbound calls to the front desk folks by, I don't know, more than 50%. And it really changed their experience and the experience they were able to provide their patients. Those front desk people are usually the ones that are manning the waiting room. They're checking people in and out. And you know yourself when you go to a doctor's office and the phone is ringing and there's just that frenetic type feeling. And now they don't have to worry about that. They can manage their waiting room. They're more like concierge people. They can, look at their patients in the eyes and actually spend some time with them because they're just not answering all these hundreds and hundreds of calls.
Right, right. Well, I'm just, before I wrap up with a few final thoughts with you, I'm realizing that I forgot to mention a housekeeping point, which is that if you would like to submit any questions, you can use the questions tab in the webinar toolbar for all of you in the audience. And even without giving those instructions, I've been given a few questions here that have come in. But before I wrap it up and open it up for questions, Chris, do you have any kind of final thoughts here on that you want to share before we open it up for people?
Sure. Okay, so let's see. The most important thing anyone can remember, and this is throughout healthcare, but especially with this kind of application, is keeping your caller as the center of all the processes you create. You won't go wrong as long as you keep that in the center of your heart. And then spend the time, this is something I found out, spend the time to map and understand the caller's journey. It's really interesting what you'll find out. And just even bring patients in to help you with that, because you'll find out things that you don't know, I can guarantee it. And then really important, don't be afraid of automation where it makes sense. In this day and age, callers expect self-service options. They're busy. They just want to get where they need to go, and they expect it. At the same time, though, you need to be able to make it easy for people who don't want to deal with self-service options to opt out and get a real person. I guess that's my thoughts.
Well, thank you for that. Okay, I have a few questions that have come in. Let's see. Here's one. How have the physicians responded to the changes to calls at the clinics?
I think initially they were resistant. They were very worried about changes. I think most of us who work with physicians maybe realize that they're a little bit trepidatious about these kind of things. But now they love it because they see the difference it made to their staff. Their staff is now actually able to concentrate on clinical things and not just answering phones all day. So we've had really positive feedback from our physicians.
Great. And then another question about how long did it take you, talk a little bit about integrating the electronic, let me read this specifically, let's see. What was the time frame to make all these scheduling changes and EHR integrations?
Oh boy, this is a huge project, and these projects usually, depending on the size of how many clinics and outpatient services, and we're even doing surgery scheduling at Tahoe, it can take at least a year, depending on, and you make all these changes, and it takes a while to roll all these clinics on, because most of the time we don't go big bang. We roll on one and then another or smaller groups so that we can staff up as appropriate. We're moving staff, we're changing workflows within the EMR. It's a very complicated process. So we take our time and we get it right, and it usually takes 12 to 18 months.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right, great. Let's see what else I've got. Let's see. How does the IVR support your Schegistration processes? I think you've touched on that a little bit, but maybe kind of talking about the call triage aspect of it.
Yeah, exactly. To tell you the truth, I don't even know how I would be able to really do this efficiently without this voice-activated IVR technology now, because we have all these specialized people within the access center, and in order to utilize them right, we need to get patients to the right people within our group of specialists. So the IVR just helps us get everyone there. And then we have a group that can, for people who opt out and want to talk to somebody, those people know exactly where to put everybody. But the IVR, again, lets the majority of people navigate themselves to where they need to go without involving one of our people.
Great. And then one other question that's come in is, how do you handle multiple language needs?
Oh, well, luckily, Parlance provides that. So we have, especially in Truckee at Tahoe Forest, we have a large Hispanic population. Mm-hmm. And Sabrina, our voice person, I feel like I know Sabrina personally. She speaks English, Spanish, probably many languages actually, and it's just seamless. And we give everybody an option to say anything in Spanish. Once they start talking in Spanish, it switches over to her Spanish talking. I didn't say that right, but it's seamless. People who want to talk Spanish, right, it just goes right over to the same English script, but it's in Spanish.
Right. So I should jump in here and say Parlance accommodates English and Spanish, and then for other languages, we have a variety of techniques around if there's a need for a language that we don't support, techniques around routing those calls to either automation that is spoken in that language or to 8 live agents who speak that language. Then we have time for one other question here, and it says, did the solution enable callers to ask what they wanted and then they were routed, or was the outcome decided automatically? Some with automated answer and some routed, etc. Does that question make sense to you?
I'm not sure I understand. The patients can say what they want, and then they're routed according to what they want. And if at any time we don't understand what they're wanting, they go to a live agent so that the live agent can maybe probe a little bit more. Because a lot of times I find that the patients don't really know what they want. Right. So they know what they want the result to be, but they don't know where to go to get that result. So for those patients that are struggling, we get them into a live operator really quickly, and then the live operator can help decide what they need to who they need to be talking to.
Great. And then I'll say here that what we see at Parlance is we do have some situations where people are asking a question about, yes, I need hours of operation or something. We would do a readback of that for them. We would answer that question through the automation for them. But the most typical use case for us, and especially in this situation, is to understand where the patient needs the call routed. So to a specific scheduling specialty, to somewhere else inside the health system, or to an operator to help navigate that call because their need is more complex for whatever reason. Okay, and I think, how long did it take before you saw the results that you are presenting?
Oh, within days. I mean, we had to tweak a little bit, but we saw results within days. I mean, I could almost say the next day we started seeing results. And then Parlance is great. You get in there and you tweak things. They're listening to everything, so they can help you, maybe rearrange your wording a little bit more. Some communities say things in different ways than other communities. But within a week, for sure, we were seeing these fantastic results. I remember when we turned it on for pediatrics, that night they called me and they were like, oh my God, 50% of our calls are gone. We're just sitting here. We don't know what to do. And they loved it. They absolutely loved it.
Golly, great. Okay, we got time for one more, and that is, how did these changes impact your staffing? So you could talk about both at Renown and Tahoe Forest. Yeah.
So for our staffing, we didn't change staffing like numbers. We rearranged the tasks people were doing because we didn't need this massive amount of people just answering inbound calls and trying to figure out where to put them. We actually we moved a lot of them to the back, and they were doing new work. Like they were doing authorizations, they were doing pre-registration, they were actually scheduling. So we did not reduce staff at all. I know that's kind of a fear that a lot of people have going into something like this. We just use those people more efficiently and use them doing things that actually made money for the system and ensured financial security?
Well, and that's a good point. We talk a lot at Parlance about, use of resources. And you spend so much time training your customer service and patient experience representatives to be empathetic and to really deal with the very human needs. And what Parlance is really trying to do is come in and take sort of this routine, non-empathic aspect of that caller journey out and actually make it easier for callers, less friction, smoother. What we often talk about with our customers is the ability to increase capacity, your answering capacity, and like you say, reallocation of that staffing resource. So that can happen in a variety of ways, obviously. Okay, you know what? We're a minute past what we promised everybody. So, Chris, I want to tell you, thank you very much. This is your expertise is so valuable. I'm glad that you were willing to share it with this audience. And of course, if anybody has any questions that weren't answered, please submit them and we'll get back to you. Parlance and Chris both will be happy to answer those. So thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.